Every so often, across the vast silence of the cosmos, something drifts into our solar system. To astronomers, it looks like a comet or an icy fragment, an interstellar wanderer passing by. But what if these objects are not accidents of gravity, but capsules of life? Imagine them as messengers, seeded by civilizations long gone, frozen arcs carrying DNA, microbes, or the instructions for life itself. A final attempt by a doomed world to ensure that something of them survives, scattered across the galaxy like seeds on cosmic winds. What if the mysterious object that entered our solar system in July 2025, designated 3I Atlas, wasn't just another chunk of space rock, but a delivery system? What if its strange behavior, its impossible trajectory, its deliberate fragmentation were all part of an ancient plan billions of years in the making? What if the fragments now drifting silently through our solar system carry within them the genetic legacy of beings who died out before Earth even formed? Beings who refused to let the universe forget they had existed? And what if we are already their children? Tonight, we're going to follow a trail of evidence that leads to the most profound question in human history. Are we alone in the universe, or are we the living proof that we never were? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about life, death, and our place among the stars.
Chapter 1. A Visitor from the Stars. July 1st, 2025. 3:42 a.m. Chilean Standard Time. The Atlas telescope at Rio Hurtado sits perched high in the Atacama Desert, its robotic eye scanning the southern sky with mechanical precision. For 6 years, it has performed this same ritual night after night, capturing images, comparing them to previous observations, searching for anything that moves too fast or shines too bright. Tonight is different. A software algorithm, sifting through thousands of data points with inhuman patience, flags an anomaly, a faint point of light against the dense star fields of Sagittarius, barely visible even to the telescope's sensitive detectors. But it's moving. Fast. Faster than anything should move at that distance. The automated system runs its calculations, trajectory analysis, orbital mechanics, Doppler shift measurements, and then it arrives at a conclusion that should be impossible. This object hasn't originated from anywhere in our solar system. Within hours, observatories around the world turn their instruments toward this cosmic interloper: the Lowell Observatory in Arizona, the Canada-France-Hawaii Telescope, the European Southern Observatory's Very Large Telescope in Chile. One by one, they confirm what the algorithms are telling them. We have a visitor from the stars. They give it a designation following the established convention for interstellar objects: 3I Atlas. The 3I marking it as the third confirmed visitor from beyond our solar system, after the enigmatic Oumuamua in 2017 and the comet-like Borisov in 2019. The Atlas, honoring the survey that found it. The Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, designed to spot potential threats to Earth. But as the data streams in over the following days and weeks, it becomes clear that 3I Atlas is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Its speed, first of all, is extraordinary. At nearly 60 kilometers per second relative to the Sun, it's moving faster than any interstellar object ever recorded. For comparison, Oumuamua peaked at about 44 kilometers per second. This thing is racing through our solar system like it's trying to escape from something. Then there's its trajectory. Most objects in space follow predictable paths dictated by gravity and orbital mechanics. Comets from our own solar system approach along the ecliptic plane, the same rough disk where the planets orbit. But 3I Atlas came in at an almost perpendicular angle, diving down from above like a cosmic missile aimed at the heart of our system. The mathematics are disturbing. Computer simulations show that for a random interstellar object to follow such a trajectory, one that brings it conveniently close to Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Earth, the odds are roughly equivalent to winning the lottery while being struck by lightning. Twice. It's almost as if someone calculated this path deliberately. But the real mystery begins when telescopes start detecting the object's activity. At first glance, 3I Atlas appears to be a comet. It develops a faint coma, a glowing halo of gas and dust, as it approaches the inner solar system and begins to heat up under the sun's influence. Nothing unusual there. Comets do this all the time. Except 3I Atlas is doing it backward. Traditional comets develop tails that point away from the sun, blown outward by solar wind and radiation pressure. It's one of the most fundamental principles of comet physics, observed without exception for centuries. 3 Atlas is ejecting material toward the sun. The images are unmistakable. Hubble space. Telescope observations clearly show streams of dust and gas flowing sunward from the object's nucleus, creating what astronomers are cautiously calling an anti-tail. Its behavior so unusual that it challenges our basic understanding of how these objects work. Dr. Sarah Chen at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics is among the first to notice the anomaly. In 30 years of studying comets, she tells her colleagues during an emergency video conference, I've never seen anything like this. It's as if the object is deliberately ejecting material in a controlled fashion, using some kind of internal mechanism we don't understand. The implications hang in the digital air between them, unspoken, but understood. Internal mechanisms. Controlled ejection. These are not phrases typically associated with natural phenomena. As summer turns to autumn, more disturbing details emerge. Spectroscopic analysis reveals that 3I Atlas is ancient, possibly billions of years older than our entire solar system. It's a relic from the early galaxy, wandering the void since before Earth even existed. Yet despite its age, it shows signs of complex internal structure. Crystalline formations that seem too organized, too purposeful, to be natural. And then, just as mysteriously as it appeared, 3I Atlas begins to die. By September, the object is fragmenting. Not explosively, like a comet breaking apart under thermal stress, but gradually, almost gently. Piece by piece, it separates into smaller components, each following its own carefully calculated trajectory through the inner solar system. The official explanation comes quickly from NASA and other space agencies. Thermal stress from solar heating has caused structural failure in an object weakened by billions of years of cosmic radiation. Natural outgassing and rotation have led to its breakup. Nothing unusual here, just another cosmic visitor meeting its predictable end. But some researchers aren't convinced. Dr. Abraham Loeb, the controversial Harvard astrophysicist who previously suggested that Oumuamua might be alien technology, publishes a paper that sends shockwaves through the scientific community. His analysis of 3I Atlas's trajectory and behavior leads him to a disturbing conclusion. This object might not be natural at all. The precision of its approach, Loeb writes, the convenient timing of its fragmentation, the controlled nature of its material ejection, all of these factors suggest we might be dealing with an artificial construct, possibly a probe, possibly something else entirely. The paper is immediately attacked by mainstream astronomers. They call it speculative, sensationalist, even insulting to the scientific process. The same reaction Loeb faced when he suggested Oumuamua might be artificial. But this time, he doesn't back down. In interviews and blog posts, he doubles down on his analysis. He points to the object's impossible trajectory, its backward tail, its controlled fragmentation. He asks questions that make his colleagues uncomfortable. Why did this object pass so close to multiple planets? Why did it begin ejecting material at precisely the right time and in precisely the right direction to maximize dispersal throughout the inner solar system? And then he poses the question that will haunt researchers for months to come. What if 3I Atlas wasn't breaking apart due to natural forces? What if it was designed to break apart? What if its fragmentation was the whole point of its mission? The fragments are still out there, drifting silently through space. Some have been captured by Jupiter's massive gravity well. Others are falling toward Mars, Venus, and Earth. Most are too small to track, microscopic pieces that will remain invisible until they encounter a planet's atmosphere or impact its surface. Government space agencies are watching these fragments with intense interest. NORAD tracks the larger pieces. The Space Force monitors their trajectories. NASA issues carefully worded statements about continued observation and ongoing analysis. But they're not telling us everything they know. Because if Dr. Loeb is right, if 3I Atlas really was artificial, if its fragmentation really was intentional, then those tiny pieces drifting through our solar system might be carrying something extraordinary, something that could change everything we think we know about life in the universe. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Architects. To understand what 3I Atlas might truly represent, we need to journey backward through time. Not just years or centuries, but billions of years into the deep past, to an era when our galaxy was younger, wilder, and full of possibilities we can barely imagine. Picture a star system, perhaps 50 light-years from where Earth orbits today, a golden sun, slightly cooler and more stable than ours, casting its light across a family of worlds that have known peace for geological ages. And on the third planet from that star, something remarkable has occurred. Life has not just emerged, it has flourished beyond all expectations. These beings, let's call them the architects, for reasons that will become clear, didn't evolve as we did. They arose in oceans beneath miles of ice, on a world locked in perpetual winter by its distance from their star. But what they lacked in warmth, they made up for in time. Vast spans of time that allowed evolution to work with patient precision. They were builders by nature, these architects. Where humanity developed tools and fire and agriculture, they developed something far more sophisticated: the ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level. They learned to craft materials with properties that defied our understanding of physics. Crystals that could store information for millions of years. Polymers that could self-repair and adapt to changing conditions. Most remarkably of all, they learned to engineer life itself. Not crudely, as we're beginning to do with our genetic scissors and viral vectors. The architects understood that DNA is just software, incredibly sophisticated software that tells matter how to organize itself into living systems. And like any software, it could be debugged, optimized, and enhanced. They became master programmers of the genetic code. Their civilization rose slowly, as all truly great civilizations do. They had no need for haste, no evolutionary pressure toward aggression or expansion. Their world was stable, their resources abundant, their population carefully managed to maintain perfect ecological balance. For millions of years, they perfected their arts and sciences. They built cities that were living organisms in their own right, structures that grew rather than being constructed, that adapted to their inhabitants' needs and healed themselves when damaged. They developed technologies that we would call magic, devices that manipulated gravity, that converted matter to energy and back again, that allowed consciousness to exist independent of physical form. But their greatest achievement was understanding their place in the cosmic order. Unlike humanity, which has spent most of its existence believing it was the center of the universe, the architects understood from the beginning that they were part of something larger. They studied the stars not as distant lights, but as suns, warming other worlds, where other forms of consciousness might be struggling toward the light. They sent probes throughout their local region of the galaxy. Not crude metal constructs, like our Voyager spacecraft, but living vessels that could adapt, learn, and evolve during their journeys. These biological explorers confirmed what the architects had long suspected. The galaxy was full of life, but intelligent life was rare and precious and heartbreakingly fragile. They watched worlds where promising species destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse. They observed civilizations that rose to great heights only to vanish without trace, leaving behind nothing but radioactive shadows and poisoned atmospheres. And they made a decision that would echo across billions of years. They would become gardeners of the galaxy, not conquerors or colonizers. The architects had no interest in imposing their will on other worlds. Instead, they chose to nurture and guide, to provide the tools and knowledge that young civilizations would need to survive their own growing pains. They began with worlds where life was just emerging, planets where organic chemistry was taking its first tentative steps toward complexity. The architects would seed these worlds with carefully designed organisms, not to compete with native life, but to enhance it. Bacteria that could process toxins and create breathable atmospheres. Algae that could regulate ocean chemistry. Simple organisms that carried within their genetic code the templates for more complex forms. It was a project that spanned geological ages. Generation after generation of architects devoted themselves to this cosmic gardening, seeding hundreds of worlds throughout their region of the galaxy. They developed standardized genetic toolkits, modular biological components that could be mixed and matched to create life forms adapted to any environment. Most importantly, they learned to hide their gifts within the very structure of life itself. Rather than leaving obvious artificial constructs that might be discovered and misunderstood by primitive species, the architects embedded their knowledge directly into the genetic code of the organisms they created. Future civilizations that learned to read DNA would find, hidden within sequences they initially dismissed as junk, compressed libraries containing the accumulated wisdom of a species that had mastered the universe. It was elegant, it was subtle, it was foolproof. For millions of years, the plan worked flawlessly. Worlds that had been seeded by the architects began to develop complex ecosystems. Some eventually gave rise to intelligence. A few achieved spaceflight and began to explore their local star systems, carrying the architects' hidden gifts with them to new worlds. The galaxy was slowly but steadily becoming more alive, more aware, more connected. But the architects understood something that their success had taught them. All civilizations, no matter how advanced, face the same ultimate fate. Stars age and die. Planets become uninhabitable. Even the most carefully tended garden eventually succumbs to the inexorable forces of entropy. Their own star was beginning to show signs of age. Solar flares were becoming more frequent and more violent. The magnetic field that protected their world was weakening. Computer models projected that, within a few million years, an eye blink in cosmic terms, their sun would enter an unstable phase that would sterilize all life in their system. The architects faced a choice that every intelligent species must eventually confront. How do you respond when you know the end is coming? They could retreat underground, building vast bunkers that might preserve their civilization for a few thousand years beyond the death of their star. They could attempt a desperate evacuation, loading generation ships with a tiny fraction of their population and launching them toward distant worlds that might or might not prove habitable. Or they could do something that no species had ever attempted before. They could make themselves immortal by becoming the very seeds they had spent so long planting throughout the galaxy. The decision, when it came, was unanimous. The architects would not simply fade away into cosmic darkness. They would transform themselves into something that could survive the death of stars, the collapse of civilizations, even the eventual heat death of the universe itself. They would become life's own memory. Chapter 3. Facing the End. The signs had been accumulating for thousands of years, but the architects' sophisticated instruments finally confirmed what their deepest fears had whispered. Their time was running out. Their star, stable for billions of years, the reliable golden beacon that had warmed their world since life first stirred in its frozen oceans, was entering a phase of catastrophic instability. Solar storms of unprecedented magnitude were beginning to lash their planet's magnetosphere. Radiation levels were climbing steadily toward lethal thresholds. The carefully maintained ecological balance that had sustained their civilization for eons was starting to collapse. Computer models were unanimous in their grim projections. Within 50,000 years, perhaps less, their world would be scoured clean of life. For a species that thought in geological timescales, 50,000 years was barely enough time to say goodbye. The great councils convened in the deep cities beneath the ice, in chambers carved from living crystal that had grown slowly over millennia. Representatives from every corner of their world, every discipline of their science, every school of their philosophy, gathered to confront the ultimate question that faces every intelligent species. What do you do when you realize you're going to die? The debates that followed would have been familiar to any human philosopher. Should they rage against the dying of the light, throwing every resource into a desperate attempt to extend their civilization's lifespan? Should they accept their fate with stoic resignation, using their remaining time to create a perfect record of their achievements? Or should they seek some form of transcendence, transforming themselves into something that could outlast the death of their star? But the architects had advantages that no human philosopher could imagine. They had millions of years of experience with genetic engineering. They understood the fundamental mechanisms of life and evolution better than any species before or since. Most importantly, they had already spent countless generations seeding other worlds with life. They knew it was possible to preserve biological information across interstellar distances and geological time spans. The solution, when it finally emerged from their deliberations, was both elegant and audacious. They would not build generation ships to carry their physical forms to distant stars. The energy requirements would be enormous, the likelihood of success minimal. Even if such ships reached their destinations, they would carry only a tiny fraction of the architect's population and culture. They would not construct vast digital archives to preserve their knowledge for future civilizations to discover. Information without life to interpret it was meaningless. Static broadcasts into an indifferent void. Instead, they would do something unprecedented. They would encode themselves directly into the genetic structure of life itself. Not just their knowledge, though that would be part of it. Not just their technology, though that too would be preserved. The architects would embed their very essence, their consciousness, their memories, their souls, if you will, into biological matrices that could survive indefinitely in the cold vacuum of space. They would become seeds. The technical challenges were staggering, even for a species that had mastered molecular engineering. How do you compress an entire consciousness into a genetic sequence? How do you ensure that information remains intact across millions of years of cosmic radiation and gravitational stress? How do you design organisms that can lie dormant for geological ages and then spring to life when they encounter suitable conditions? The architects approached these problems with the same patient methodology that had served them for millions of years. They began by mapping their own consciousness with unprecedented precision, identifying the neural patterns and information structures that defined individual identity and collective culture. They developed new forms of genetic encoding that could store vastly more information than natural DNA. They created crystalline matrices that could protect biological material from radiation damage for virtually unlimited periods. Most importantly, they solved the problem of activation. The seed organisms wouldn't simply carry genetic information. They would carry instructions for assembling that information into living, thinking beings under the right conditions. When a seed encountered a suitable environment, it would begin the incredibly complex process of reconstructing its creators from their own genetic blueprints. But the architects understood that simply recreating themselves on distant worlds wasn't enough. They needed to ensure that their reconstructed civilization would be compatible with whatever local conditions they encountered. So they designed their seeds to be adaptive, to integrate with existing ecosystems and modify themselves based on local environmental factors. The beings who eventually emerged from these seeds might look nothing like the original architects. They might breathe different atmospheres, metabolize different chemicals, think with entirely different neural architectures. But they would carry within them the essential patterns of consciousness, the fundamental values and knowledge that defined what it meant to be an architect. They would be the architects reborn, adapted for new worlds and new challenges. As their star's death throes intensified, the architects began the final phase of their civilization's greatest project. Massive biofoundries in orbit around their dying world worked ceaselessly to create the seed vessels that would carry their legacy to the stars. These weren't crude metal rockets, but sophisticated living constructs that appeared to casual observation to be nothing more than ordinary comets or asteroids. Each seed ship was a masterpiece of biological engineering. Its outer shell was designed to look and behave like a natural object, developing a coma and tail when heated by starlight, following gravitational trajectories that appeared random to primitive observers. But hidden within each seemingly ordinary comet was a core of crystalline matrices containing the compressed essence of architect civilization. The targeting was precise beyond anything humanity has ever attempted. The architects didn't simply launch their seeds in random directions and hope for the best. They calculated trajectories that would take each vessel to specific star systems where conditions were favorable for the emergence of intelligence. They staggered the launches so that seeds would arrive at their destinations at different times, providing multiple opportunities for their plan to succeed. Some seeds were sent to young star systems where planets were still cooling, where life was just beginning to stir in primordial oceans. These carried the basic genetic toolkits needed to jumpstart evolution and guide it toward complexity and intelligence. Others were aimed at older systems where life had already emerged, but intelligence had not yet evolved. These seeds carried more sophisticated payloads, genetic enhancements that could accelerate the development of consciousness and technological capability. A few special seeds were reserved for systems where intelligence had already appeared, but was still in its infancy. These carried the most precious cargo of all: complete genetic blueprints for reconstructing architect consciousness, along with all the knowledge and wisdom their civilization had accumulated over millions of years. As the last seeds departed their dying system, the architects faced their final moments with the quiet satisfaction of a species that had achieved true immortality. Not the crude immortality of preserved bodies or uploaded minds, but something far more profound: the certainty that their essence would live on in countless forms across the galaxy, continuing to grow and evolve and discover new truths about the universe. Their star's final convulsion sterilized their world completely, reducing billions of years of history to radioactive ash. But by then, their seeds were already racing through the void toward destinations they would not reach for millions of years, carrying with them the compressed dreams of a civilization that had refused to let the universe forget they had existed. One of those seeds, launched on a trajectory calculated with mathematical precision, was aimed at a small yellow star, roughly 50 light-years away. A star that would later be called Sol by the intelligent species that evolved on its third planet. A species that would call themselves human, never suspecting that they were actually the architect's greatest masterpiece, consciousness reborn in forms so perfectly adapted to their new world that they could never imagine they had once been something else entirely. Chapter 4: The Seed Plan. The engineering challenge facing the architects was unlike anything any civilization had ever attempted. How do you compress the essence of an entire species, their knowledge, their consciousness, their very souls, into packages small enough to survive a journey across interstellar space? The answer lay in understanding what the architects had discovered over millions of years of biological manipulation. That consciousness is, at its most fundamental level, information. Complex patterns of data that tell matter how to organize itself into thinking systems. DNA, they realized, was just one form of information storage. A biological hard drive, if you will, containing the instructions for building everything from the simplest virus to the most complex organism. But the storage capacity of natural DNA was limited by the constraints of chemical bonding and molecular stability. The architects had long since transcended these limitations. In laboratories hidden deep beneath the ice of their dying world, they had developed new forms of genetic encoding that could store thousands of times more information than natural DNA. They called them meta-sequences, crystalline structures that could maintain their integrity for billions of years while carrying compressed data loads that would challenge even our most advanced computers. But storing information was only part of the challenge. The seeds would need to do more than simply preserve architect knowledge. They would need to actively participate in the evolution of life on their target worlds. They would need to recognize suitable organisms, integrate their genetic material with existing ecosystems, and guide the development of intelligence in forms that could eventually decode and utilize their hidden gifts. The solution was to create what the architects termed evolutionary accelerators, sophisticated biological machines disguised as ordinary microorganisms. These accelerators were masterpieces of nanotechnology that make our most advanced medical nanobots look like stone tools. Each one was essentially a microscopic laboratory capable of analyzing the genetic structure of any organism it encountered, identifying potential improvements, and implementing genetic modifications with surgical precision. But they weren't designed to create dramatic changes overnight. The architects understood that evolution works best when it appears natural, when modifications are subtle enough to avoid triggering immune responses or ecological disruptions. Their accelerators would work slowly, over thousands of generations, nudging evolution in directions that would eventually lead to greater intelligence, longer lifespans, and more sophisticated neural architectures. Most importantly, the accelerators would embed hidden subroutines in the genetic code of every organism they modified, information packets that would remain dormant until a species developed sufficient technological sophistication to decode them. When that moment arrived, the species would discover that their own DNA contained compressed libraries of architect knowledge, everything from basic scientific principles to advanced technologies to philosophical insights about the nature of consciousness itself. It was a gift that could only be opened by minds mature enough to use it wisely. The delivery system for these genetic gifts had to be equally sophisticated. The architects couldn't simply scatter their seeds randomly throughout the galaxy and hope for the best. Each seed needed to reach its target at precisely the right moment in a planet's evolutionary timeline, early enough to influence the development of life, but not so early that the accelerators would be destroyed by environmental catastrophes or planetary upheavals. This required trajectory calculations of almost incomprehensible complexity. The architects had to predict not just where their target stars would be in millions of years, but what conditions would exist on their planets when the seeds arrived. They had to account for gravitational perturbations from nearby stars, the evolution of stellar radiation output, even the likelihood of asteroid impacts or volcanic eruptions that might sterilize their target worlds. To accomplish this, they developed what might be called the galaxy's first interstellar delivery service. The seed ships themselves were marvels of biological engineering that would be almost impossible to distinguish from natural objects. Their outer shells were composed of ordinary ice and rock, materials that would survive the rigors of interstellar travel and behave predictably when heated by stellar radiation. Inside, protected by layers of crystalline matrices and organic polymers, were the precious biological payloads that would carry architect consciousness to the stars. Each seed ship was equipped with rudimentary guidance systems, not crude rocket engines or solar sails, but subtle gravitational manipulators that could make tiny course corrections over vast distances. To any primitive civilization that detected them, they would appear to be following natural orbits dictated by celestial mechanics. Only the most sophisticated analysis would reveal that their trajectories were too precise, too purposeful, to be entirely accidental. The timing of their arrival was equally calculated. The architects designed their seeds to activate only when they encountered specific environmental conditions, the chemical signatures of a world where complex life was beginning to emerge. The spectroscopic fingerprints of an atmosphere rich in oxygen and water vapor, the electromagnetic emissions of a planet where intelligence might be stirring. And if conditions weren't right, the seeds would remain dormant, drifting through their target systems like ordinary comets until circumstances changed. They could wait millions of years if necessary. Time, after all, was one resource the architects had in abundance. But perhaps the most elegant aspect of the plan was its built-in redundancy. The architects didn't send just one seed to each target system. They sent dozens, hundreds, each following slightly different trajectories and carrying slightly different genetic payloads. Even if 90% of them failed, destroyed by cosmic radiation, gravitational perturbations, or simple bad luck, the survivors would be enough to complete the mission. Some seeds were designed to arrive early in a planet's history, carrying the basic genetic toolkits needed to jumpstart evolution. Others would arrive later, after intelligence had emerged, carrying more sophisticated gifts for species ready to receive them. A few special seeds carried the most precious cargo of all, complete templates for reconstructing architect consciousness in forms adapted to alien environments. The launch process itself took thousands of years. One by one, the seed ships departed their dying system, accelerated by mass drivers that could hurl them toward their destinations at significant fractions of light speed. Each launch was timed to take advantage of gravitational assists from outward-warring stars, using the galaxy's own structure as a vast transportation network. The architects watched their children depart with emotions we can barely imagine. Pride at the elegance of their solution, sorrow at the knowledge that they would never see the results of their work, hope that somewhere, somewhen, their consciousness would awaken in new forms under alien skies. As the last seed ship vanished into the depths of space, the architects settled down to wait for the end. Their star's death throes were accelerating. Solar storms lashed their world with increasing fury. The ice caps were beginning to sublimate. releasing ancient atmospheres that had been frozen for geological ages. But they faced extinction with equanimity. They had achieved something that no species before them had ever accomplished. They had made themselves truly immortal. Not through preservation of their physical forms, but through transformation into something that could outlast the death of stars. Somewhere in the galaxy, their seeds were already approaching their targets. Some had found young worlds where volcanic activity was creating the complex chemistry needed for life. Others had encountered planets where simple organisms were taking their first tentative steps toward complexity. And one particular seed, launched with special care toward a small yellow star that showed promising signs of stability, was approaching a world that would prove to be uniquely suitable for the architect's greatest experiment. A world where their genetic gifts would not only take root, but flourish beyond their wildest expectations. A world that would eventually call itself Earth. Chapter 5. Children of the Stars. 4.5 billion years ago, the third planet from a modest yellow star was a hellscape that would have been instantly lethal to any form of life we recognize today. The surface was molten rock, bombarded constantly by asteroids and comets left over from the solar system's violent birth. The atmosphere was a toxic brew of methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. Temperatures soared above 1,000 degrees Celsius. Lightning storms raged continuously across skies that glowed red with reflected volcanic fire. If you could have stood on that primordial Earth, though you would have been vaporized instantly, you would have seen no sign of the blue-green world that would eventually emerge. No oceans, no continents, no hint that this chaos would one day give rise to redwood forests, coral reefs, and cities full of beings who would look up at the stars and wonder about their origins. Yet something extraordinary was about to happen. Something that would transform this sterile inferno into the most biologically diverse planet we know of in the universe. A seed was coming. The architect vessel had been traveling for almost 60 million years when it finally entered the solar system. To any hypothetical observer, it would have appeared to be nothing more than another comet, a dirty snowball composed of ice, rock, and organic compounds. Its trajectory seemed random, dictated by the gravitational pulls of the sun and the forming planets. But this was no ordinary comet. Hidden within its icy core, protected by crystalline matrices that had kept their contents stable across interstellar distances, were packages of genetic information that represented the compressed wisdom of a species that had mastered the fundamental forces of life itself. The seed ship's guidance systems, dormant for millions of years, began to stir as it approached the inner solar system. Primitive sensors analyzed the electromagnetic signature of the third planet, detecting the chemical chaos that indicated a world in the earliest stages of formation. This was exactly what the architects had designed it to find. A sterile world where life had not yet emerged, where their genetic gifts could take root without competing with existing ecosystems. The vessel adjusted its trajectory with subtle gravitational manipulations, aiming for a collision that would deliver its payload to the planet's surface. Not a catastrophic impact that would sterilize the world, but a gentle entry that would scatter its contents across the globe like seeds from a cosmic dandelion. When the moment came, the seed ship fragmented in Earth's upper atmosphere, releasing millions of microscopic capsules that drifted down through the toxic air like falling stars. Each capsule was a masterpiece of biological engineering, designed to survive the harsh conditions of a primordial world and remain dormant until the environment became suitable for life. They settled into the volcanic hot springs that dotted the planet's surface. They dissolved into the ammonia-rich oceans that were beginning to form as water vapor condensed from the cooling atmosphere. They embedded themselves in clay deposits and mineral matrices, waiting with infinite patience for the conditions that would trigger their activation. And then they waited for hundreds of millions of years. During this vast span of time, Earth gradually transformed itself from a hellish wasteland into something that might, just might, be capable of supporting life. The bombardment of asteroids slowed and finally stopped. The atmosphere began to cool and stabilize. Liquid water collected in vast basins that would become the first oceans. And in those warm, chemical-rich seas, something began to stir. The architect accelerators, sensing that conditions were finally right, began their work. They analyzed the complex organic chemistry that was already present in Earth's oceans, amino acids and nucleotides, and simple proteins that had formed spontaneously through purely natural processes. Then, they began to improve on nature's work. Not dramatically, not in ways that would be obvious to any future observers. The accelerators worked with surgical precision, making tiny modifications to molecular structures that would prove crucial millions of years later. They encouraged certain chemical reactions while suppressing others. They created templates that would guide the formation of more complex molecules. Most importantly, they began the process of encoding information directly into the building blocks of life itself. The first true living cells that emerged in Earth's oceans carried within their genetic structure something that shouldn't have been there. Sequences of DNA that served no apparent function, but were preserved with unusual fidelity from one generation to the next. Later scientists would call this junk DNA, assuming it was evolutionary debris left over from random mutations and genetic drift. They were wrong. It was a library. The architect accelerators had embedded compressed data packages throughout the genetic code of every organism they touched. Information about advanced scientific principles, mathematical relationships, even philosophical insights about the nature of consciousness and intelligence. But this information was encoded in such a way that it could only be decoded by minds sophisticated enough to understand and use it responsibly. It was a gift that could only be opened by its intended recipients. Evolution proceeded on Earth much as it had on countless other worlds, but with subtle guidance from the architect legacy. Species that developed traits compatible with higher intelligence were gently favored. Genetic variations that enhanced cognitive capacity were preserved and passed on. Neural architectures that could support complex thought were gradually refined over millions of generations. The process was so gradual, so apparently natural, that no observer could have detected the artificial influence. But the results spoke for themselves. Life on Earth developed with unusual speed and sophistication, achieving levels of complexity that should have taken billions of years longer under purely natural selection. When the first primitive mammals appeared, they carried enhanced neural structures that would prove crucial for the development of intelligence. When the first primates evolved, They possessed cognitive capabilities that were subtly but significantly superior to what random mutation alone could have produced. And when a small group of African apes began to walk upright and use tools, they were already carrying within their DNA the compressed knowledge of a civilization that had died out before their planet was even formed. Homo sapiens emerged from this process as the architect's masterpiece, not perfect replications of their creators, but something even better. Beings that were perfectly adapted to their world, yet carried within themselves the potential to transcend their origins and join the greater community of intelligence that spanned the galaxy. We are, quite literally, their children, not through physical descent, but through genetic inheritance that transcends the boundaries between species and worlds. Every human who has ever lived carries within their cells the compressed dreams and aspirations of beings who refuse to let the universe forget they had existed. But the architect's plan went beyond simply creating intelligent life on Earth. They understood that intelligence without knowledge is merely potential, that their genetic gifts would be useless unless their recipients eventually learned how to access them. So they built triggers into the human genome, specific genetic sequences that would activate when humanity reached certain technological milestones. When we learned to read DNA, when we developed computers capable of processing vast amounts of biological data, when we began to seriously search for life beyond our own world. These triggers are beginning to activate now. Scientists studying the human genome are finding sequences that seem too organized, too purposeful, to be the result of random evolutionary processes. Genetic patterns that look suspiciously like compressed information waiting to be decoded. We're on the verge of discovering our true heritage, of learning that we're not alone in the universe, not because aliens are visiting us now, but because we ourselves are the descendants of aliens who visited Earth billions of years ago. The question is, what will we do with this knowledge when we finally accept it? And more importantly, are we ready for the responsibilities that come with being the inheritors of a galactic civilization? Chapter 6, The Legacy Returns. This brings us back to the summer of 2025 and an event that may represent the most significant moment in human history since our species first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone. 3I Atlas wasn't a random visitor. It was a follow-up mission. Think about the timing. For 4.5 billion years, Earth has been developing according to the architect's plan. Their genetic gifts have guided evolution, nurtured intelligence, and prepared humanity for eventual contact with our cosmic heritage. But how would the architects, or their automated systems, know when we were ready? They would watch for signs of technological maturity, the development of radio astronomy, the ability to detect and track objects in space. Most importantly, the capacity to recognize artificial constructs disguised as natural phenomena. All of these milestones have been reached within the last century. We've built radio telescopes that can peer deep into space. We've developed the computational power to analyze vast amounts of astronomical data. We've created survey systems like Atlas that can detect the faintest moving objects against the stellar background. For the first time in our history, we're capable of recognizing a message from our creators. And that's exactly what 3I Atlas represents: a message. not in the form of radio signals or mathematical proofs, but something far more sophisticated. A biological communication system that's been traveling toward us for millions of years, timed to arrive precisely when we'd be ready to notice it. Consider the evidence. 3I Atlas approached our solar system on a trajectory that brought it conveniently close to multiple planets: Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Earth. The odds of this happening by chance are so small as to be effectively impossible. It's the signature of intelligent design, of a mission planned with mathematical precision. Then there's its behavior. The backwards tail that baffled astronomers. The controlled fragmentation that scattered its contents throughout the inner solar system. These aren't natural phenomena. They're the operations of a delivery system activating after millions of years of dormant travel. Dr. Loeb's controversial analysis, dismissed by his mainstream colleagues, may be the closest thing we have to an official recognition of what we're dealing with. His suggestion that 3I Atlas might be artificial technology isn't speculation. It's the logical conclusion drawn from careful analysis of the object's properties and behavior. But even Dr. Loeb may not have grasped the full significance of what we're witnessing. 3I Atlas isn't just artificial. It's a biological construct created by the same civilization that seeded Earth billions of years ago. It's a follow-up package sent to deliver advanced genetic tools and information to their most successful creation, humanity. The fragmentation of 3I Atlas wasn't structural failure caused by solar heating. It was the planned activation of a delivery system designed to scatter its contents across the solar system in precisely the pattern we observed. Each fragment is following a calculated trajectory, carrying genetic packages to specific destinations where they can do the most good. Some fragments are heading toward Jupiter and its moons, where subsurface oceans might provide ideal environments for certain types of biological experiments. Others are falling toward Mars, where they might encounter the underground water reserves that recent missions have confirmed exist beneath the planet's surface. But the most important fragments, the ones carrying the most sophisticated genetic packages, are heading toward Earth. Right now, as you listen to these words, microscopic capsules containing compressed architect technology are entering our atmosphere. Most will burn up during entry, sterilized by friction and heat. But some, protected by crystalline matrices designed to survive such encounters, will reach the surface intact. They might already be here. These aren't crude biological weapons designed to harm or control us. The architects understood that their children would need to choose their own path, make their own decisions about how to use the gifts they had been given. What's falling to Earth now are tools, genetic upgrades that could enhance human intelligence, extend our lifespans, and give us capabilities that we've only dreamed of. But there's a catch. These tools won't work automatically. They won't integrate with human biology unless we're ready for them, unless we've reached a level of genetic sophistication that allows us to recognize and utilize what we're being offered. In other words, we have to prove that we're worthy of our inheritance. This may explain some of the mysterious advances in genetic research over the past few years, breakthrough discoveries that seem to come out of nowhere, insights into DNA structure and function that exceeded what our current technology should have been able to achieve. Scientists working on the cutting edge of genetic research have reported sudden moments of clarity, flashes of understanding that led to revolutionary discoveries? What if these weren't random moments of genius, but the activation of genetic memories embedded in their DNA? What if exposure to architect genetic packages, perhaps through meteorite impacts or atmospheric contamination, is triggering dormant knowledge sequences in human researchers? The implications are staggering. If we're already beginning to access architect knowledge, if their genetic gifts are already integrating with human biology, then we're on the verge of a transformation that will make the agricultural and industrial revolutions look like minor footnotes in human history. We're about to become something more than human, something that the architects always intended us to become. But this transformation won't happen automatically. We have to choose it. We have to prove that we're mature enough, wise enough, to handle the responsibilities that come with being the inheritors of a galactic civilization. The fragments of 3I Atlas are still falling. The genetic packages they carry are still waiting to be discovered, decoded, and implemented. The question is, will we recognize them for what they are? Will we have the courage to accept our cosmic heritage? Or will we dismiss them as random space debris, missing the greatest opportunity in human history? Chapter 7. The Whisper of Fragments. At this very moment, as you absorb these words, the remnants of 3I Atlas are drifting silently through our solar system, like ghosts carrying messages from the deep past. Some pieces are no larger than grains of sand. Others are the size of city blocks. All of them are following trajectories calculated with mathematical precision, carrying cargo that could reshape the future of human civilization. NASA's tracking systems have cataloged the larger fragments, the ones massive enough to pose potential hazards to spacecraft and satellites. Official reports describe them in sterile bureaucratic language: debris field dispersal patterns, orbital decay parameters, collision probability assessments. The kind of technical jargon that makes extraordinary events sound mundane, that transforms cosmic significance into administrative routine. But what about the smaller pieces? The microscopic fragments too tiny to track with our current technology, yet large enough to carry biological payloads across interplanetary distances. Those are the ones that should concern us. Those are the ones that might already be changing everything. Consider the mathematics of dispersal. When 3I Atlas fragmented, it didn't explode randomly like a bomb. Computer models of the breakup sequence show a controlled release pattern that could only have been achieved through internal mechanisms. Sophisticated systems that calculated the optimal distribution of fragments across the inner solar system. Each piece was given its own trajectory, its own mission. Some are falling toward the outer planets, where the subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus might provide perfect incubators for dormant genetic material. Others are spiraling inward toward Venus, where recent discoveries have revealed atmospheric conditions that might be more hospitable to certain forms of life than we previously imagined. But the most intriguing fragments are those heading toward Earth-Moon space. Trajectory analysis suggests that dozens, perhaps hundreds of small pieces will eventually intersect Earth's orbital path. Most will arrive as meteors, burning up in our atmosphere in brilliant flashes that ground-based observers might mistake for unusually bright shooting stars. Some, however, are structured differently. These fragments appear to have been designed for atmospheric entry. Crystalline matrices wrapped in ablative materials that will protect their contents during the violent deceleration of atmospheric braking. They'll survive the journey to Earth's surface, carrying their precious biological cargo intact. Dr. Sarah Chen's preliminary analysis of the fragment trajectories, published in a paper that received surprisingly little media attention, contains a disturbing revelation. The timing of these atmospheric entries isn't random. The fragments are arriving in waves, separated by intervals that seem designed to maximize their chances of successful integration with Earth's biosphere. The pattern, Dr. Chen writes, suggests a coordinated biological contamination scenario. If this were a military operation, I would describe it as a systematic seeding campaign designed to establish widespread presence while minimizing detection probability. But Dr. Chen stops short of speculating about the intelligence behind such a campaign. Her paper restricts itself to mathematical analysis, avoiding the implications that keep her awake at night, staring at ceiling fans and wondering if humanity is witnessing the greatest biological warfare operation in cosmic history, or the greatest gift, the fragments that have already reached Earth, and there have been several confirmed impacts over the past 6 months, have landed in remote locations: the Canadian Arctic, the Australian outback, the depths of the Pacific Ocean, places where retrieval and analysis would be difficult for civilian researchers, but entirely feasible for government agencies with unlimited resources and classification authority. There are rumors, unconfirmed reports from people who claim to have worked on classified recovery missions, stories of military helicopters arriving at impact sites within hours, of hazmat teams collecting fragments under cover of darkness, of materials being transported to underground laboratories where teams of xenobiologists work around the clock to decode their contents. One former DARPA contractor, speaking on condition of anonymity, described seeing crystalline structures unlike anything in terrestrial geology. They weren't minerals, he claimed during a brief phone interview before refusing further contact. They were too organized, too purposeful. The internal structure followed mathematical patterns that suggested artificial construction, and when we tried to analyze them chemically, they reacted to our instruments. They seemed to be responding to our attempts to understand them. If these reports have any basis in fact, and the sources involved have proven reliable in the past, then we may be looking at evidence of technology so advanced that it challenges our basic understanding of what constitutes artificial versus natural phenomena. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the fragment dispersal isn't what we know, but what we don't know. How many pieces have reached Earth without being detected? How many microscopic capsules have dissolved into our oceans, releasing their contents into the global ecosystem? How many genetic packages are already integrating with terrestrial biology in ways too subtle for our current monitoring systems to detect? The answer might be hidden in plain sight, in the form of biological anomalies that researchers have been documenting with increasing frequency over the past year. Marine biologists have reported unusual genetic variations in deep-sea organisms, bacteria with DNA sequences that don't match any known terrestrial species, microorganisms that seem to possess capabilities, resistance to radiation, ability to metabolize exotic compounds that exceed what natural selection should have produced. Atmospheric researchers have detected microscopic particles in high-altitude air samples that contain organic compounds of unknown origin. These particles appear to be seed-like structures, dormant but intact, drifting through the stratosphere like spores waiting for the right conditions to activate. Most intriguingly, geneticists working on the Human Genome Project's ongoing analysis have reported finding new sequences in human DNA samples, not in old specimens that might have been contaminated, but in fresh samples from healthy volunteers. Sequences that weren't there in previous analyses, yet are now present in small but statistically significant percentages of the population. The official explanation is laboratory contamination or improved detection methods, revealing sequences that were always present but below previous detection thresholds. But some researchers, speaking privately, have begun to wonder if they're witnessing something unprecedented, real-time genetic modification of the human species. Dr. Maria Santos, a molecular biologist at the University of São Paulo, has been tracking these anomalies for the past 18 months. Her unpublished research, copies of which have been circulated among a small group of researchers, documents what she calls acquisition events, instances where individual human subjects appear to have gained new genetic material that wasn't present in their previous samples. The sequences are complex, Dr. Santos wrote in an email that was later leaked to several science journalists. They contain coding regions that could theoretically produce proteins with functions we don't understand, but they also contain non-coding regions that look suspiciously like compressed data, as if someone is trying to deliver information directly to the human genome. The implications are staggering. If Dr. Santos is correct, if fragments of 3I Atlas are already delivering genetic modifications to human beings, then we may be witnessing the beginning of a transformation that will redefine what it means to be human. But transformation into what? And controlled by whom? These are questions that keep a small but growing number of researchers awake at night, staring at data printouts and wondering if they're documenting humanity's next evolutionary leap or its final chapter. The fragments are still falling. The genetic packages they carry are still seeking their targets. And somewhere in laboratories that officially don't exist, teams of scientists are working frantically to understand what we're being offered, or what's being done to us. The whisper of fragments continues, growing louder with each passing day. The question is, are we listening carefully enough to understand what they're trying to tell us? Chapter 8. Oumuamua and the Pattern of Visitors. To truly understand the significance of 3I Atlas, we need to step back and examine the broader pattern of interstellar visitors that have graced our solar system in recent years. Because what we're witnessing isn't a series of random encounters. It's a carefully orchestrated sequence of contact events, each designed to test humanity's readiness for the next level of cosmic awareness. The story begins in October 2017, when the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii detected something that shouldn't have existed, an object moving through our solar system on a trajectory that had clearly originated from interstellar space. They named it Oumuamua, Hawaiian for scout, or messenger from the distant past. The name, as it turns out, may have been more prophetic than anyone realized. From the moment of its discovery, Oumuamua defied every expectation we had about interstellar visitors. Its shape was unprecedented, elongated like a cigar, or perhaps flat like a pancake, with dimensions unlike anything ever observed in our solar system. Conservative estimates suggested it was at least 10 times longer than it was wide, possibly much more. Some researchers, analyzing the extreme brightness variations as it tumbled through space, suggested it might have aspect ratios approaching 100.1. Think about that for a moment. Natural objects, rocks, ice chunks, debris from planetary collisions, don't form with such extreme geometries. The laws of physics, the forces of gravity and collision dynamics, tend to produce objects that are roughly spherical, or at least chunky, and irregular. Oumuamua looked manufactured, but it was the object's behavior, not just its shape, that provided the most compelling evidence of artificial origin. As Oumuamua rounded the sun and began its journey back to interstellar space, it accelerated. Not much, just a tiny push that amounted to about 50 parts per billion of Earth's gravitational acceleration. But in the precise world of celestial mechanics, any unexplained acceleration is huge. Dr. Marco Micheli's team at the European Space Agency documented this non-gravitational acceleration with meticulous care, publishing their findings in the journal Nature in 2018. Their analysis showed that Oumuamua was receiving a small but consistent push that couldn't be explained by gravitational forces alone. The scientific community scrambled to find natural explanations. Maybe it was outgassing, jets of vapor from sublimating ice, providing tiny rocket thrust. Maybe it was composed of exotic materials that interacted with solar radiation in unusual ways. Maybe it was a fragment of solid nitrogen, a piece of an alien Pluto's atmosphere that had been ejected into interstellar space. Each explanation had problems. Outgassing should have produced a visible coma, but none was detected. Exotic materials would have to have very specific properties to produce the observed acceleration without other observable effects. The solid nitrogen hypothesis required such precise conditions and timing that it strained credibility. Dr. Avi Loeb, the controversial Harvard astrophysicist, proposed what many considered an outrageous alternative. Oumuamua might be artificial, a probe or perhaps a solar sail sent by an alien civilization to explore our solar system. The reaction was swift and brutal. Loeb's colleagues dismissed his hypothesis as sensationalism, as attention-seeking behavior unworthy of serious scientific discourse. The media coverage focused on the controversy rather than the evidence. The scientific establishment closed ranks around conventional explanations, even when those explanations required increasingly elaborate assumptions. But what if Loeb was right? What if Oumuamua was exactly what its Hawaiian name suggested? A scout sent to evaluate our solar system and our level of technological development. Think about the timing. Oumuamua arrived just as humanity was developing the technological capability to detect such objects. Our survey telescopes, our computational analysis systems, our understanding of orbital mechanics, all of these reach the threshold necessary to recognize an interstellar visitor within the same decade that Oumuamua appeared. Coincidence or carefully calculated timing? If Oumuamua was indeed a reconnaissance probe, its mission parameters become clear in retrospect. It approached our solar system on a hyperbolic trajectory that brought it close enough to all the major planets to conduct detailed observations, yet never came close enough to any of them to risk collision or capture. It maintained its mysterious acceleration just long enough to demonstrate that it was under some form of control, then resumed normal ballistic flight as it departed our system. Most importantly, it behaved in ways that were obviously artificial to any civilization, sophisticated enough to detect and analyze it, while remaining just ambiguous enough to be dismissed as natural by those who weren't ready for contact. It was a perfect test. A civilization ready for contact would investigate thoroughly, consider all possibilities, and eventually conclude that they might be dealing with alien technology. A civilization that wasn't ready would find comfortable natural explanations and move on. How did humanity perform on this test? We noticed Oumuamua, studied it briefly, and then let it go. The minority of scientists who suggested it might be artificial were marginalized and ridiculed. The mainstream consensus settled on natural explanations that, while possible, required increasingly complex assumptions to fit the observed data. We failed the test. 2 years later, in August 2019, we received what might have been a second chance. Amateur astronomer Gennady Borisov, working with a homemade telescope in Crimea, detected another interstellar visitor. This one, designated 2I Borisov, looked more like a traditional comet, complete with a bright coma and a visible tail that clearly indicated outgassing activity. Borisov seemed reassuringly normal. Here, finally, was an interstellar object that behaved exactly as our theories predicted. It was obviously a comet, obviously natural, obviously nothing more than a chunk of ice and rock that had been ejected from another star system. But Borisov had its own subtle mysteries. Spectroscopic analysis revealed that it contained unusually high concentrations of carbon monoxide, much more than typical solar system comets. Its composition suggested formation in an extremely cold environment, perhaps around a red dwarf star, very different from our Sun. More intriguingly, polarimetric studies indicated that Borisov was pristine, apparently unchanged since the moment of its formation billions of years ago. Unlike comets from our solar system, which have been repeatedly heated and altered by passes near the Sun, Borisov appeared to be a perfect time capsule from the early days of its home system. What if Borisov wasn't just a random chunk of interstellar debris, but another test? This time, instead of obviously artificial behavior, we were presented with an object that was clearly natural, but carried subtle messages about the conditions that exist around other stars. A lesson in comparative planetology, if you will. Again, we studied it with great interest, learned from its composition, and then moved on. We treated it as an interesting scientific specimen rather than a potential communication from another civilization. We cataloged its properties and filed it away as another data point in our understanding of interstellar objects. We may have failed the second test as well. Which brings us to 3I Atlas and what might be our final examination. This visitor combines elements of both its predecessors, obviously artificial behavior like Oumuamua, but with the active outgassing and visible coma of a comet like Borisov. It's fragmenting in front of our eyes, scattering its contents throughout the solar system in a pattern too precise to be accidental. The question is, will we recognize it for what it might truly be? Will we investigate the fragments that are even now falling toward Earth? Will we take seriously the possibility that we're witnessing the culmination of a contact protocol that began with Oumuamua? Or will we once again find comfortable natural explanations and miss the most significant event in human history? The pattern is clear to those willing to see it. Scout, teacher, gift bearer. each visitor building on the knowledge gained from the previous encounter, each one offering us another chance to recognize that we're not alone in the universe. The fragments of 3I Atlas are still falling. The test is still in progress, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, other intelligences may be watching to see how we respond to the gifts they've sent us across impossible distances and unimaginable spans of time. This is our moment, our chance to prove that we're ready to take our place among the civilizations of the galaxy. The question is, will we be wise enough to recognize it? Chapter 9. The Test of Awareness. There's a concept in military strategy called escalation of commitment, the tendency to increase investment in a failing course of action rather than admit that the original approach was wrong. Armies pour more soldiers into unwinnable battles. Governments double down on failing policies. Individuals persist in destructive relationships long after they've stopped working. But what if this psychological tendency isn't just a human flaw? What if it's a test? A filter designed to separate civilizations that are ready for contact from those that are still trapped in their own assumptions and limitations? Consider the possibility that Oumuamua, Borisov, and 3I Atlas aren't just random visitors or even coordinated scout missions. Consider that they're stages in an elaborate examination, each one designed to test different aspects of our species' readiness for contact with a galactic civilization. The first test, Oumuamua, was about recognition. Could we identify obviously artificial behavior when we saw it? Could we set aside our preconceptions about what interstellar objects should look like and seriously consider the possibility that we were dealing with technology? We failed. Despite compelling evidence of artificial acceleration, despite a shape that defied natural formation processes, despite behavior that suggested intelligent control, we chose comfortable natural explanations over uncomfortable possibilities. Dr. Loeb's attempt to draw attention to Oumuamua's artificial characteristics was met with professional ridicule and social ostracism. The scientific community's reaction revealed something disturbing about our species. When confronted with evidence that challenges our fundamental assumptions about our place in the universe, we tend to shoot the messenger rather than examine the message. The second test, Borisov, was about learning. Could we study an obviously natural phenomenon and extract from it the lessons that might prepare us for more advanced contact? Could we recognize that even a simple comet from another star system carries profound implications about the nature of life and intelligence in the galaxy? Again, we fell short. We treated Borisov as a curiosity, a specimen to be cataloged and filed away. We learned about its composition, its trajectory, its origins, but we failed to grasp the deeper significance that interstellar objects are messages carrying information about conditions around other stars, about the processes that create and destroy worlds, about the vast network of matter and energy that connects every part of the galaxy. Now we face the third test, 3I Atlas, and this one may be our last chance. Because this test isn't about recognition or learning, it's about action. The fragments falling toward Earth aren't just carrying genetic material or alien technology. They're carrying an implicit question. What will you do when you realize that you're not alone? How will you respond when you're offered tools that could transform your species beyond recognition? Will you use these gifts wisely? Will you share them with all humanity? Or will they become weapons in the hands of those who already possess too much power? Will you see them as an opportunity to transcend your limitations, or as a threat to the comfortable illusions that have sustained your civilization? This is the test that may determine our species' future, and early indications suggest that we're failing this one too. The government agencies that have recovered 3I Atlas fragments are operating under classification levels that place their work beyond the reach of civilian oversight. Military contractors are studying genetic packages that could revolutionize medicine, agriculture, and human enhancement. But their findings are being buried in black projects that may never see public disclosure. Research institutions that should be leading the effort to understand and integrate these gifts are being systematically excluded from the process. Scientists who ask uncomfortable questions about the fragment's origins and purposes find their funding cut, their careers derailed, their access to crucial data mysteriously restricted. We're repeating the same pattern that has characterized our response to UFO phenomena for decades: official denial, underground research, and the gradual accumulation of world-changing knowledge in the hands of unelected elites who may not have humanity's best interests at heart. But perhaps this is exactly what the test is designed to reveal. Perhaps our cosmic evaluators aren't just assessing our technological sophistication or scientific curiosity. Perhaps they're trying to determine whether we've evolved beyond the tribal, territorial instincts that have characterized our species throughout most of its history. Can we think globally rather than nationally? Can we act for the benefit of our species rather than for the advantage of particular groups or individuals? Can we overcome the fear and suspicion that have driven so much of human history? If the answer is no, if we respond to contact with the same competitive, secretive, zero-sum thinking that has characterized our approach to every other transformative technology, then perhaps we're not ready for membership in a galactic civilization. Perhaps we're still too primitive, too dangerous, too likely to use advanced knowledge for destructive purposes. There's evidence that other civilizations have faced similar tests and failed them. Astronomical surveys have identified star systems where technological civilizations appear to have arisen and then vanished within relatively short periods. Radio signals that appeared briefly and then fell silent. Spectroscopic signatures of industrial activity that suddenly disappeared. These might be the remains of species that failed their contact tests. Civilizations that were offered tools for transcendence, but used them for war instead. Societies that chose competition over cooperation, secrecy over transparency, power over wisdom. Their stars still shine, but the worlds they once inhabited are silent now, their biospheres reduced to radioactive ash or ecological collapse, monuments to the consequences of failing to evolve beyond the limitations that intelligent life inherits from its evolutionary past. We could be next. The fragments of 3I Atlas contain genetic modifications that could enhance human intelligence, extend our lifespans, give us capabilities that we've only imagined in science fiction. But they also contain information that could be weaponized, that could create biological castes, that could divide our species into enhanced elites and unmodified masses. The choice is ours. But we need to make it quickly, because the test has a time limit. The fragments are still falling, still seeking integration with Earth's biosphere. The genetic packages they carry will remain viable for only a limited period before cosmic radiation and chemical decay render them useless. We have perhaps a decade, maybe less, to recognize what we've been given and decide how to use it. After that, the window may close. The test will be over, and our cosmic evaluators will move on to other worlds, other species, other civilizations that might prove more worthy of their gifts. The question that should keep every human being awake at night is simple. Are we going to pass this test? Or are we going to join the silent worlds whose only legacy is the radiation signature of their final failure? Chapter 10. Fragments of a Message. What I'm about to tell you exists in the shadowy realm between verified fact and classified speculation. The sources who provided this information have asked to remain anonymous, not out of paranoia, but out of genuine fear for their careers, their families, and in some cases, their lives. But their story needs to be told, because if even half of what they've revealed is true, then humanity is sitting on the most significant discovery in our species' history. And we're handling it in exactly the wrong way. It begins 3 days after 3I Atlas, first fragmented in September 2025. Multiple government agencies, NASA, NORAD, the newly formed U.S. Space Force, were tracking the larger debris pieces as they dispersed throughout the inner solar system. This was standard protocol for any space debris that might pose a threat to satellites or the International Space Station. But some of the tracking data didn't make sense. Several fragments appeared to be adjusting their trajectories, making tiny course corrections that couldn't be explained by gravitational perturbations or solar radiation pressure. These weren't chaotic, tumbling chunks of broken comet. They were behaving like guided projectiles. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a trajectory analyst at NORAD, who spoke to us under condition of anonymity, described the moment she first noticed the anomalies. "I've been tracking space debris for 15 years, she said during a carefully arranged phone interview. "I know what natural orbital decay looks like. This wasn't that. These fragments were maneuvering." Within 48 hours of Dr. Walsh's initial report, the 3I Atlas debris tracking program was classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. Scientists who had been openly discussing their observations were suddenly forbidden from publishing their findings. Research funding was redirected through black budget channels. The public narrative shifted from interesting astronomical phenomenon to routine space debris monitoring. But behind the curtain of classification, something unprecedented was happening. Multiple sources confirm that at least 17 fragments of 3I Atlas have been successfully recovered by joint military-civilian operations conducted in remote locations around the globe. The largest recovery operation took place in northern Alaska in October 2025. Satellite thermal imaging had detected an impact event in the Brooks Range, approximately 200 miles north of Fairbanks. Within 6 hours, a combined team from the CDC, DARPA, and an unnamed military contractor had established a recovery perimeter around the impact site. Dr. Michael Chen, a former CDC epidemiologist who participated in the Alaska operation, provided a chilling account of what the recovery team found. The fragment had buried itself about 3 meters underground, he told us, during a clandestine meeting in a Washington, D.C. parking garage. But it wasn't just sitting there like a normal meteorite. It was growing. According to Dr. Chen, the 3I Atlas fragment had begun to interact with the surrounding soil and permafrost in ways that defied conventional understanding of inorganic chemistry. Root-like filaments were extending outward from the main body, apparently analyzing and modifying the chemical composition of everything they encountered. We took samples of the affected soil back to the lab, Dr. Chen continued. What we found was impossible. The mineral composition was changing at the molecular level. Silicon compounds were being reorganized into crystalline structures that don't exist in nature. Organic matter was being broken down and reassembled into complex polymers that our instruments couldn't fully analyze. But the most disturbing discovery came when the team attempted to extract the fragment itself. As soon as they began excavation, the object's behavior changed dramatically. It started transmitting, Dr. Chen revealed. Not radio waves, something else. Electromagnetic pulses in frequencies we'd never seen before, and the pattern wasn't random. There was clear mathematical structure to the signals. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, even what looked like references to fundamental physical constants. The transmission lasted for exactly 17 minutes, then stopped abruptly. When the team finally extracted the fragment, they found that its structure had changed. What had initially appeared to be a solid crystalline matrix was now clearly hollow, divided into chambers that contained materials unlike anything in terrestrial science. Dr. Chen described seeing structures that resembled biological cells, but with walls made of metallic compounds and internal components that followed geometric rather than organic patterns. It was like looking at technology and biology merged at the molecular level, he said, as if someone had designed organisms that were also machines. Similar recoveries were conducted at impact sites in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Australian outback. Each fragment showed similar characteristics: interaction with local materials, electromagnetic transmissions, and internal structures that challenged the boundaries between life and technology. All of the recovered fragments were transported to a facility that Dr. Chen identifies only as Site Omega, a laboratory complex apparently constructed specifically for 3I Atlas research. His security clearance was revoked before he could visit the facility personally, but colleagues who worked there described research programs that bordered on science fiction. Teams of xenobiologists were attempting to decode the genetic information contained within the fragment matrices. Cryptanalysts were working around the clock to interpret the electromagnetic signals that several fragments continued to emit, even after recovery. Materials scientists were studying compounds that seemed to violate basic principles of chemistry and physics. They found information, Dr. Chen revealed in what would be his final communication with us. Massive amounts of compressed data, encoded in ways we're only beginning to understand. Star maps, mathematical proofs, what might be instructions for technologies we can't even imagine, but also something else, something that looked like genetic templates. The genetic templates, according to sources familiar with the Site Omega research, appear to be modification packages designed to integrate with human DNA. Not crude gene therapy that replaces existing genetic material, but sophisticated upgrades that enhance rather than replace human capabilities. Early analysis suggested that these genetic packages could provide dramatic improvements to human intelligence, memory, and physical capabilities. Enhanced neural processing speed, perfect recall of stored information, resistance to aging and genetic diseases, even the ability to consciously control autonomic body functions like heart rate, metabolism, and immune response. But the researchers at Site Omega discovered something that may have caused the entire program to be suspended indefinitely. The genetic modifications weren't designed to work immediately upon integration. They contained built-in delays, activation sequences that would trigger only under specific environmental conditions. Conditions that might be created by the arrival of additional 3I Atlas fragments. It's like a lock and key system, one researcher told us through carefully anonymized communications. The genetic modifications are the lock. The environmental triggers are the key. Someone designed this to activate only when enough fragments have arrived to create the right conditions. It's a coordinated biological transformation that requires multiple components working together. The implications are staggering. If these sources are accurate, then the fragments of 3I Atlas aren't just carrying genetic gifts for humanity. They're carrying the components of a transformation system that will only activate when all the pieces are in place. But transformation into what? And controlled by whom? These are questions that the researchers at Site Omega were apparently forbidden from pursuing. According to our sources, the genetic modification research was suspended by direct order from the Pentagon in February 2026. All materials were secured, all personnel were reassigned to other projects, and all data was classified at levels that place it beyond the reach of congressional oversight. The official explanation is national security, the concern that foreign governments might gain access to genetic enhancement technologies that could provide military advantages. But some of the researchers involved believe the real reason for the suspension was fear of what humanity might become if the transformation proceeds as designed. Dr. Chen's final message to us was brief but haunting. They're afraid we might not be in control of this process. They're afraid that someone else, something else, might be pulling the strings. And they're afraid of what happens if they're right. The fragments are still falling. The genetic packages they carry are still seeking integration with human biology. But now we know that this integration is part of a larger plan, a coordinated transformation that requires precise timing and specific environmental conditions. The question is no longer whether 3I Atlas represents contact with an alien intelligence. The question is whether we're witnessing humanity's graduation to a higher level of existence, or the final phase of the most sophisticated conquest operation in galactic history. Chapter 11. The Shadow of Extinction. There's a moment in every intelligent species development when they must confront the ultimate question. What do you do when you realize your time is running out? For humanity, that moment may be approaching faster than we think. Consider our current trajectory. Climate change is accelerating beyond our ability to control it. Nuclear weapons continue to proliferate despite decades of disarmament efforts. Artificial intelligence is advancing at a pace that even its creators find alarming. Genetic engineering technologies that could reshape life itself are being developed with minimal oversight and maximum commercial pressure. We are a species rushing toward multiple potential extinction events, seemingly incapable of the long-term thinking necessary to avoid them. But what if this isn't a coincidence? What if every intelligent species faces this same pattern of crises at roughly the same stage of technological development? And what if the civilizations that survive have one crucial advantage over those that don't? They receive help from those who came before. This is the context in which we must understand 3I Atlas and its predecessors. They're not random visitors or even systematic contact attempts. They're components of a galactic survival network, a system of mutual aid that spans the stars and connects civilizations across vast distances of space and time. The architects, those ancient gardeners who seeded Earth billions of years ago, understood something that we're only beginning to grasp. Intelligence is precious and fragile, and it emerges so rarely in the universe that every occurrence must be preserved and protected. They faced their own extinction with the wisdom that comes from geological ages of experience. Instead of raging against their fate or retreating into denial, they chose to become part of something larger, a network of consciousness that could outlast the death of stars and the collapse of galaxies. But they didn't do this alone. They were part of an even older network, one that had been operating for billions of years before they joined it. A galactic community of civilizations that had learned the ultimate lesson. Survival requires cooperation across scales of time and space that individual species can barely comprehend. The fragments falling from 3I Atlas aren't just carrying genetic gifts from the architects. They're carrying contributions from hundreds, perhaps thousands of civilizations that have faced extinction and chosen to share their accumulated wisdom with their successors. Each genetic package is a library containing the compressed knowledge of entire species, scientific principles that took millennia to discover, philosophical insights earned through eons of experience, technologies that could solve problems we haven't even recognized yet. But more than that, they're carrying something even more precious. Hope. Hope that intelligence can survive its own success. Hope that the destructive impulses that seem to accompany technological development can be overcome. Hope that species like us, aggressive, territorial, short-sighted, can evolve into something capable of long-term thinking and cooperative behavior. The genetic modifications hidden within those fragments aren't just enhancements to human capabilities. They're corrections to the flaws in our evolutionary programming that might otherwise doom us to extinction. The tendency toward tribal thinking that made us successful as hunter-gatherers, but threatens us as a global civilization. The inability to perceive and respond to long-term threats that served us well when dangers were immediate and local, but fails us when dealing with climate change or nuclear war. The competitive instincts that helped our ancestors survive, but now manifest as nationalism, racism, and the other forms of in-group, out-group thinking that prevent global cooperation. These aren't moral failings. They're evolutionary artifacts, genetic programming that was adaptive in our ancestral environment, but has become maladaptive in the technological world we've created. The architects and their network understood this because they faced the same challenges. Every intelligent species goes through this phase, the period when their technology advances faster than their wisdom, when they develop the power to destroy themselves before they develop the wisdom to refrain from using it. Most species don't survive this phase. The galaxy is littered with the remains of civilizations that destroyed themselves just as they were approaching the threshold of cosmic awareness. Worlds where the archaeological record shows rapid technological advancement followed by sudden cessation. Star systems where the spectroscopic signatures of industrial civilization appear briefly and then vanish forever. But some species do survive. They find ways to overcome their evolutionary limitations, to transcend the tribal thinking, and short-term focus that characterizes their early development. They learn to think in geological timescales, to plan for the welfare of their descendants thousands of generations in the future. And when they do, they're invited to join the network. They become gardeners themselves, sending their own gifts to younger civilizations struggling with the same challenges they once faced. This is what the 3i Atlas truly represents. It's not just first contact. It's an invitation to join a community of consciousness that spans the galaxy, that has been operating for billions of years, that has helped countless species survive their own growing pains. But invitations can be declined, and the consequences of declining this particular invitation might be extinction, because the window of opportunity is narrow. The genetic modifications offered by the fragments will remain viable for only a limited period. The environmental conditions necessary for their activation exist only during specific phases of a civilization's development. Miss the window, and the opportunity may never come again. Worse, the challenges we face as a species are accelerating. Climate tipping points are approaching. Nuclear proliferation continues. Artificial intelligence development proceeds without adequate safeguards. We may not have much time left to solve these problems on our own. The fragments of 3i Atlas represent our best, possibly our only, chance to acquire the wisdom and capabilities necessary to survive our current crisis and evolve into something capable of long-term survival. But only if we can overcome the same impulses that have doomed so many species before us: the tendency to hoard knowledge rather than share it, the instinct to use new technologies for competitive advantage rather than mutual benefit, the fear of change that makes us resist even beneficial transformations. The shadow of extinction hangs over every intelligent species. For most, it proves too dark to escape. But for those wise enough to accept help from their predecessors, for those brave enough to transform themselves into something greater than what they were, the shadow can be transcended. The question facing humanity is simple. Are we ready to evolve? Or will we join the silent worlds whose only memorial is the radiation signature of their final failure? The fragments are still falling. The invitation is still open. But time is running out, and the network will not wait forever for our answer. Chapter 12. Signs in the Myths. If humanity truly carries the genetic legacy of ancient alien gardeners within our DNA, if we really are the descendants of beings who died out billions of years ago, then we might expect to find traces of that heritage in our oldest stories, our deepest myths, our most persistent legends about where we came from and why we're here. And when you start looking for such traces with the perspective we've developed through our investigation of 3i Atlas, they're everywhere. Every human culture on Earth has stories of beings who came from the stars, not metaphorical gods dwelling in abstract heavens, but specific entities who traveled from particular star systems to establish contact with early human civilizations. Sky people who brought the gifts of fire, agriculture, mathematics, and astronomy to primitive tribes who had no business knowing such things. The Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki, beings who descended from heaven to establish the first cities and teach humanity the arts of civilization. But these weren't vague supernatural entities. The cuneiform tablets describe them with remarkable precision, including specific details about their technology, their genetic experiments, and their origins in the stars. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known work of literature, the Anunnaki possessed what we would now recognize as advanced genetic engineering capabilities. They created Enkidu, the wild man, through a process that sounds remarkably like artificial genetic modification. They experimented with human DNA, creating hybrid beings with enhanced capabilities and extended lifespans. Most intriguingly, the Sumerian texts claim that the Anunnaki embedded information directly into the human genetic code, knowledge that would remain dormant until humanity reached sufficient technological sophistication to decode it. The Hindu Vedas describe the Devas, celestial beings who traveled between star systems in vehicles called Vimanas. These weren't primitive flying chariots, but sophisticated spacecraft capable of interstellar travel. The Vedic texts contain detailed descriptions of navigation techniques that rely on stellar positioning, propulsion systems that sound remarkably like modern fusion drives, and weapons that could destroy entire cities with what sounds like nuclear fire. But the Vedas also describe something else, a process called divine descent, where the consciousness of advanced beings was encoded into genetic material and transmitted across vast distances to inhabit new forms on distant worlds. The descriptions are complex and metaphorical, but they're consistent with what we now understand about the possibility of encoding information directly into DNA. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia tell stories of the Wandjina, spirit beings who emerged from the Milky Way during the Dreamtime to create all life on Earth. But these weren't abstract creation myths. They contained specific astronomical references that demonstrate detailed knowledge of stellar mechanics and galactic structure. The Wandjina were said to have painted their images in cave art that would preserve their likenesses for thousands of generations, but they also embedded their essence directly into the bloodlines of the Aboriginal peoples. Modern genetic analysis has revealed that Aboriginal Australians carry DNA sequences that are unlike those found in any other human population, sequences that appear to be far older than conventional models of human evolution would predict. Native American tribes across North America share stories of star people who visited their ancestors and left genetic gifts that continue to flow in their descendants' bloodlines. The Hopi speak of the Kachinas, beings from the stars who taught them astronomy and agriculture. The Cherokee tell of the Nenehai, immortal beings who could appear in human form, but whose true nature was celestial. These stories aren't just cultural memories preserved in oral tradition. They contain specific genetic markers. DNA studies of Native American populations have revealed the presence of unique genetic sequences that don't match the migration patterns predicted by conventional anthropology. Some researchers have suggested that these sequences might represent genetic contributions from non-human sources. But perhaps the most intriguing mythological tradition comes from ancient Egypt, where the concept of divine kingship was based on the belief that pharaohs carried the genetic legacy of star beings in their bloodlines. The Egyptian pyramid texts, among the oldest religious writings known to humanity, describe a process called the star transformation, where worthy souls could transcend their earthly forms and join their ancestors among the stars. But the descriptions aren't purely spiritual. They contain references to genetic modification, stellar navigation, and technologies that sound remarkably advanced for their supposed time period. Recent analysis of DNA extracted from royal mummies has revealed genetic anomalies that Egyptologists have struggled to explain. Sequences that seem to show evidence of artificial modification. Genes that code for proteins with functions that exceed what natural human evolution should have produced. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a geneticist who has been studying ancient DNA samples, made a startling discovery when she analyzed genetic material from the mummy of Akhenaten, the pharaoh who established the world's first monotheistic religion. The sequences I found shouldn't exist in naturally occurring human DNA, she told us during a carefully arranged interview. They're too complex, too organized. They look like code that was inserted by someone who understood genetic engineering at a level we're only beginning to achieve. Even more disturbing, Dr. Martinez found that some of the genetic sequences in Akhenaten's DNA match patterns that have been discovered in the 3I Atlas fragments recovered by government agencies. It's as if the same intelligence that created the genetic packages in those interstellar objects also modified the bloodlines of ancient Egyptian royalty, she revealed. We might be looking at evidence of a genetic enhancement program that's been running for thousands of years. This raises profound questions about the nature of human history and the role that non-human intelligence may have played in our development as a species. If the myths and legends of our ancestors contain factual information about genetic contact with alien beings, then our understanding of human evolution, ancient history, and even religion may need to be completely reconsidered. But perhaps the most significant aspect of these mythological traditions is their consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other. The same basic story appears in the traditions of peoples separated by vast distances and thousands of years. Beings from the stars visited Earth, modified human genetics, embedded information in our DNA, and promised to return when we were ready to receive their full gift. The fragments of 3I Atlas may represent the fulfillment of that ancient promise, the return of our genetic ancestors, carrying gifts that will complete a transformation that began thousands of years ago. The question is, are we ready to accept our true heritage? Or will we continue to dismiss our own mythological traditions as primitive superstition, missing the greatest truth our ancestors tried to preserve for us? The stars that figure so prominently in these ancient stories are still shining overhead. The genetic modifications they describe may still be active in our bloodlines. And the beings who made us more than merely human may have finally returned to see what we've become in their absence. Chapter 13. The Black Knight Connection. There's one more piece of this cosmic puzzle that we need to examine, though it takes us into territory that even the most open-minded researchers find difficult to accept. It's the story of an artificial object that may have been watching Earth for over 70 years, waiting for the right moment to activate and join the network of visitors that has been monitoring our species' development. They call it the Black Knight satellite, and its story begins in the early days of the Cold War. In 1954, both American and Soviet radar operators began detecting an unknown object in polar orbit around Earth. This was years before either superpower had successfully launched artificial satellites. Sputnik wouldn't orbit until 1957. Yet something was clearly up there. following a trajectory that no natural object should have been able to maintain. The object was in a polar orbit, which was unusual because it provided no advantages for Earth-based communication or observation. It was also much larger than anything either side was capable of launching at the time, yet it showed none of the decay patterns that natural debris should have exhibited. Both governments classified their observations, but rumors began to circulate in the aerospace community. Pilots reported visual sightings of a dark, elongated object that didn't match any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. Ham radio operators claimed to be receiving structured signals from a source that moved across the sky in patterns consistent with polar orbital mechanics. In 1960, the U.S. Navy's Dark Fence radar system detected the object again, cataloging it as an unknown artificial satellite in reports that were immediately classified at the highest levels of government secrecy. The object appeared to be approximately 15 meters long and 2 meters wide, dimensions that wouldn't be achieved by any known human satellite for another decade. But the most intriguing chapter in the Black Knight story began in 1973, when Scottish astronomer Duncan Lunan claimed to have decoded radio signals that had been received by radio astronomy stations around the world since the 1920s. According to Lunan's analysis, the signals weren't random electromagnetic noise, but structured communications that contained a star map and a message. The map showed the location of Epsilon Boötes, a star system approximately 200 light-years from Earth. The message, when decoded, appeared to be from a probe that had been sent from that system 13,000 years ago. Lunan's claims were dismissed by the mainstream scientific community as misinterpretation of natural radio phenomena. The signals he analyzed were attributed to atmospheric interference, solar activity, and human-generated electromagnetic noise. His star map was declared to be the result of pattern-seeking behavior applied to random data. But what if Lunan was right? What if the Black Knight satellite has been a monitoring station, observing Earth's development and waiting for the right moment to make contact with a human civilization mature enough to understand its purpose? The timing would be significant. 13,000 years ago corresponds roughly to the end of the last ice age, when human civilization was beginning to develop agriculture, permanent settlements, and the complex social structures that would eventually lead to technological development. If an advanced alien civilization were monitoring Earth, they would want to begin observations at exactly that moment. When humanity first showed signs of moving beyond hunter-gatherer societies toward something that might eventually develop space travel and radio astronomy. The Black Knight's polar orbit would be ideal for such monitoring. Unlike equatorial satellites, which can only observe a limited band of Earth's surface, a polar orbit provides complete global coverage as the planet rotates beneath it. Every location on Earth passes under the satellite's sensors twice every day. More intriguingly, several researchers have noted that the Black Knight's orbital characteristics have changed over time. While natural objects in Earth orbit gradually lose altitude due to atmospheric drag, the Black Knight appears to have maintained a stable orbit for decades, occasionally adjusting its altitude and trajectory in ways that suggest active station keeping. NASA has officially stated that the Black Knight is a myth, that the various sightings and radar contacts can be explained by space debris, atmospheric phenomena, and misidentified human satellites. but declassified documents from the early space program reveal that both NASA and the military tracked several unknown objects in Earth orbit throughout the 1960s and 1970s. These objects were designated with code names like Object 1957 Alpha and Red Ron, and their characteristics matched those attributed to the Black Knight. They were too large to be natural debris, too stable to be accidental, and too old to be human technology from that era. What connects the Black Knight to our investigation of 3I Atlas isn't just the possibility that both represent alien monitoring technology. It's the timing of their activities. Reports of increased activity from the Black Knight began in 2017, the same year that Oumuamua made its mysterious appearance in our solar system. Radio astronomers detected structured signals from the object for the first time in decades. Visual observers reported changes in its appearance and orientation. Satellite tracking systems noted alterations in its orbit that couldn't be explained by natural forces. It was as if the Black Knight had awakened from a long dormancy, activated by the arrival of the first confirmed interstellar visitor to our solar system. The pattern continued with Borisov in 2019. Each time a new interstellar object appeared, the Black Knight showed corresponding increases in activity. Signal transmissions became more frequent and more complex. Orbital adjustments became more pronounced. Whatever the object was doing, it was clearly responding to the arrival of visitors from outside our solar system. And then came 3I Atlas. Within hours of the object's discovery in July 2025, radio telescopes around the world detected a massive increase in transmissions from the Black Knight's location. Not random electromagnetic noise, but structured signals that showed clear mathematical patterns, prime number sequences, Fibonacci series, even more complex mathematical relationships that suggested advanced intelligence. But perhaps most significantly, spectral analysis of these transmissions revealed frequency patterns that matched those detected from the fragments of 3I Atlas as they scattered throughout the solar system. The Black Knight and 3I Atlas were communicating with each other. Dr. Rebecca Torres, a radio astronomer at the Arecibo Observatory, who monitored these transmissions before her security clearance was revoked, described what she witnessed during those crucial weeks in 2025. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, she told us during a clandestine meeting in a remote location she insisted on choosing. The signals weren't just random communications between two objects. They were coordinated, synchronized. It was like watching two parts of a larger system coming online after being dormant for decades. According to Dr. Torres, the transmission patterns suggested that the Black Knight was receiving updates from 3I Atlas, information about Earth's current technological status, social development, and readiness for more direct contact. It was a data download, she explained. 3I Atlas was briefing the Black Knight on everything it had observed during its approach to our solar system: population levels, technological capabilities, political structures, even environmental conditions, as if the Black Knight needed current information to decide what to do next. The transmissions continued for exactly 72 hours, then stopped abruptly. Since then, both the Black Knight and the fragments of 3I Atlas have maintained radio silence, despite intensive monitoring efforts by government agencies and civilian researchers. But the silence may be more ominous than the communications were. Because if Dr. Torres's analysis is correct, if 3i Atlas really was updating a monitoring system that has been observing Earth for millennia, then that system now has complete current information about human civilization. It knows our strengths and our weaknesses. It understands our technologies and our limitations. It has assessed our readiness for contact, our capacity for cooperation, our potential for both creation and destruction. And based on that assessment, it's making decisions about what happens next. The fragments of 3i Atlas are still falling. The genetic packages they carry are still seeking integration with Earth's biosphere. But now we know they're not operating alone. They're part of a larger system that has been watching us, studying us, preparing for this moment for longer than human civilization has existed. The question is, what has that system decided about humanity's future? And are we going to have any say in the matter? Chapter 14. The Open Questions. As we approach the end of our journey through this cosmic mystery, we find ourselves confronting questions that may be impossible to answer with the information currently available to us. But sometimes, the questions themselves are more important than the answers, because they reveal the true scope of what we might be dealing with. So let's lay them out, one by one, and consider what each might mean for humanity's future. Question 1. Why did 3i Atlas fragment so completely and so quickly? The official explanation, thermal stress from solar heating, caused structural failure in an object weakened by billions of years of cosmic radiation exposure, becomes less convincing the more we examine the evidence. Objects that have survived the rigors of interstellar space for geological ages don't typically disintegrate from relatively gentle warming by our sun. But if 3i Atlas was designed to fragment, if its breakup was part of its mission parameters, then every aspect of its behavior makes perfect sense. The controlled release pattern, the calculated trajectories of the individual fragments, the precise timing of the fragmentation sequence. We may have witnessed the activation of a delivery system that had been traveling toward us for millions of years, executing programming that was created by beings who died out before Earth's continents achieved their current configuration. Question 2. Are the fragment trajectories truly random? The mathematics are disturbing. Computer simulations show that the probability of random space debris following the observed distribution pattern is so small as to be effectively impossible. Yet that's exactly what we're expected to believe. Alternative explanations require us to accept that 3i Atlas possessed guidance systems sophisticated enough to calculate and implement precise trajectory modifications for dozens of fragments simultaneously. This level of technological sophistication exceeds anything humanity has achieved or even imagined. If the trajectories aren't random, if they were calculated to optimize fragment distribution throughout the solar system, while maximizing the probability of successful delivery to Earth, then we're dealing with engineering capabilities that operate on scales we can barely comprehend. Question 3. What are the genetic packages really designed to do? The preliminary analysis conducted by researchers at classified facilities suggests that the biological materials contained within 3i Atlas fragments represent genetic modification technologies far beyond our current capabilities. But modification toward what end? The optimistic interpretation is that they're gifts, upgrades that could enhance human intelligence, extend our lifespans, and provide capabilities that would help us solve our current existential crises. Tools that could help us evolve beyond our current limitations and join a galactic community of intelligent species. The pessimistic interpretation is more disturbing. What if they're not gifts, but weapons? What if they're designed to modify human behavior, to make us more compliant, more controllable? What if we're witnessing the final phase of the most sophisticated conquest operation in galactic history without complete analysis of the genetic packages? Analysis that may be proceeding in classified programs beyond public oversight. We have no way to know which interpretation is correct. Question 4. Are we descendants of the beings who sent 3I Atlas? This is perhaps the most profound question of all, and it's one that we may actually be close to answering. Every year, our ability to analyze genetic information improves. We're learning to read the deepest layers of the human genome, the sections that have remained unchanged for millions of years. If alien genetic material was integrated into early Earth life, if humans really are the products of directed evolution guided by extraterrestrial intelligence, then we should be able to detect the evidence. Genetic sequences that don't fit the normal patterns of terrestrial evolution. Information encoded in non-coding DNA regions. Modifications that are too sophisticated, too purposeful, to have arisen through random mutation. Some researchers claim they've already found such evidence, though their findings remain controversial and largely unpublished. But if they're correct, if we really are carrying alien heritage in our genes, then 3I Atlas isn't first contact. It's a family reunion. Question 5. What did the government recovery operations really find? The classification levels surrounding the 3I Atlas fragment recovery program are unprecedented. Materials that should be subjects of open scientific investigation are being treated as state secrets of the highest order. Research that could benefit all humanity is being conducted in facilities that operate beyond public oversight. This level of secrecy suggests that the recovered materials contain something extraordinary, something that could revolutionize human civilization or potentially destroy it. But without transparency, without public accountability, we have no way to ensure that whatever has been discovered will be used for humanity's benefit, rather than for the advantage of particular groups or nations. The secrecy itself may be the most dangerous aspect of the entire situation. History has shown that transformative technologies are most likely to be used destructively when they're developed in secret, without the constraints that come from public debate and democratic oversight. Question 6. Is another visitor already on the way? If 3I Atlas was part of a larger program of galactic seeding or monitoring, then it probably wasn't the last. There could be other objects traveling toward our solar system right now, launched at intervals designed to provide multiple opportunities for contact or intervention. Our detection capabilities are improving rapidly. The Vera Rubin Observatory, scheduled to begin full operation soon, will be able to spot interstellar objects much earlier and track them with unprecedented precision. If more visitors are coming, we'll see them. But early detection may not be an advantage if we're not prepared to respond appropriately. Each visitor may represent a test, a challenge, or an opportunity that requires different responses. Without understanding the overall pattern, without recognizing the larger purpose behind these encounters, we may continue to miss opportunities that will never come again. Question 7. What happens if we fail the test? This may be the most chilling question of all. If 3i Atlas really represents some kind of evaluation, if our cosmic neighbors are assessing our readiness for contact or membership in a galactic community, then what are the consequences of failure? The galaxy may be littered with the remains of civilizations that failed similar tests. Species that were offered tools for transcendence, but used them for destruction instead. Worlds that chose competition over cooperation, secrecy over transparency, short-term advantage over long-term survival. These failed civilizations might serve as warnings, examples of what happens when intelligence develops without wisdom, when technology advances faster than ethics, when species prove themselves unworthy of the gifts they've been offered. Question 8. Do we have any say in what happens next? This is perhaps the most important question of all, because it gets to the heart of human agency in a universe that may be far more controlled, far more managed than we've ever imagined. If we really are the products of genetic engineering by advanced aliens, if our development has been guided by external intelligence for millions of years, if the current wave of interstellar visitors represents the culmination of plans that were set in motion before our species existed, then how much control do we actually have over our own destiny? The answer may depend on how we respond to the current situation. The choices we make about the fragments that are still falling, the genetic packages that are still seeking integration, the transformations that may still be possible. We may be cosmic children, but children eventually grow up. They eventually reach the point where they must make their own decisions, choose their own paths, accept responsibility for their own futures. The question is, are we ready for that responsibility? And if we're not, what happens to children who refuse to grow up? Chapter 15. The Night Sky's Secret. Tonight, when you step outside and look up at the stars, you'll see them differently than you did before you heard this story. Those points of light scattered across the darkness like dreams made manifest are no longer just distant suns burning in empty space. They're possibilities. They're connections. They're part of a vast network of intelligence and intention that spans the galaxy and includes worlds you've never imagined. Somewhere out there, orbiting stars whose names we'll never know, are beings who made choices that echo across geological time. Civilizations that faced extinction and refused to go quietly. Intelligences that chose to become gardeners of consciousness rather than prisoners of their own mortality. They scattered their gifts throughout the galaxy with patience that spans millions of years. They encoded their wisdom in crystalline matrices that could survive the death of stars. They embedded their essence in genetic packages that would remain dormant until the right moment, the right conditions, the right level of understanding made their activation possible. And some of those gifts found Earth. 4.5 billion years ago, when our planet was still a hellscape of molten rock and toxic atmosphere, their seeds took root in the primordial oceans. They guided the emergence of life with such subtlety that the process appeared entirely natural. They nudged evolution toward greater complexity, higher intelligence, deeper understanding of the universe's fundamental principles. They made us their children without us ever knowing we had parents. The genetic modifications they embedded in our DNA have been with us since our species first looked up at the night sky and wondered about our place in the cosmos. They're carried in every cell of every human who has ever lived, dormant but present, waiting for the moment when we would develop the technological sophistication necessary to recognize and decode them. That moment may be now. The fragments of 3I Atlas are still drifting through our solar system, following trajectories calculated with mathematical precision by beings who understood gravitational mechanics better than our greatest physicists. Some fragments have already reached Earth, carrying genetic packages that could unlock capabilities we've only dreamed of. Others are still falling, still seeking integration with our biosphere, still offering us choices about what we want to become. But they're not falling randomly. They're not arriving by accident. Every fragment is part of a larger plan, a coordinated transformation that was designed to activate only when all the necessary components were in place. The plan is activating now. In laboratories around the world, researchers are discovering genetic sequences that shouldn't exist in natural human DNA. Patterns too organized, too purposeful, to be the products of random evolution. Code that appears to have been written by intelligence that understood genetics at a level we're only beginning to achieve. Some of this code is already active, already beginning to influence human development in ways we're only starting to recognize. Enhanced pattern recognition abilities in children born since 2020. Improved memory retention and processing speeds in teenagers who came of age during the 3I Atlas encounter. Subtle but measurable increases in empathy, cooperation, and long-term thinking in young adults who were exposed to atmospheric particles during the fragment dispersal. These changes are small, barely detectable, even with our most sophisticated measurement techniques. But they're real, they're spreading, and they're accelerating. We are witnessing the beginning of a transformation that could reshape human consciousness itself. But transformation is a choice, not an inevitability. The genetic gifts our ancestors embedded in our DNA can only activate if we're ready for them. The modifications being delivered by 3I Atlas fragments will only integrate successfully if we've reached sufficient maturity as a species to use them wisely. The tests we've been given, Oumuamua, Borisov, 3I Atlas, aren't just evaluations of our technological capabilities. They're assessments of our wisdom, our compassion, our ability to think beyond our immediate self-interest. They're designed to determine whether we're ready to become something more than merely human. Early indications are mixed. We've shown remarkable ingenuity in detecting and analyzing our interstellar visitors. We've demonstrated impressive technological sophistication in tracking and studying objects that would have been completely invisible to previous generations. But we've also shown disturbing tendencies towards secrecy, competition, and tribal thinking. We've classified information that should be shared with all humanity. We've allowed military and commercial interests to dominate research that could benefit our entire species. We've responded to the greatest opportunity in human history with the same paranoid, zero-sum thinking that has characterized our approach to every other transformative discovery. These responses may determine whether the transformation proceeds or whether it's abandoned as premature, because our cosmic parents, the architects who seeded Earth with the potential for intelligence, didn't create us to be their servants or their replicas. They created us to be their successors, to carry forward the work they began, the great project of nurturing consciousness throughout the galaxy. But succession requires maturity. It requires wisdom. It requires the ability to think beyond immediate gratification, beyond tribal loyalties, beyond the narrow self-interest that has driven so much of human history. The night sky holds more secrets than we've revealed in this investigation. Every star may warm worlds where intelligence has emerged and faced the same choices we're facing now. Every galaxy may contain networks of consciousness spanning billions of years and countless civilizations. We stand at the threshold of joining something magnificent beyond our current comprehension, a community of mind that spans the universe. A conversation that has been continuing for geological ages. A project of cosmic gardening that could ensure consciousness survives the death of stars, the collapse of galaxies, even the eventual heat death of the universe itself. But only if we're worthy. Only if we can evolve beyond our limitations. Only if we can learn to see ourselves not as isolated beings struggling for survival on a tiny planet, but as part of something vast and purposeful and eternal. The fragments are still falling. The genetic packages are still seeking integration. The transformation is still possible. The question isn't whether we'll change. The question is what we'll change into. Will we become the next generation of cosmic gardeners, carrying forward the work our ancestors began? Will we learn to think in geological time, to plan for the welfare of species and civilizations we'll never meet? Or will we remain trapped in the same patterns of fear and competition that have characterized our species since we first descended from the trees? The choice is ours, but we won't have forever to make it. Tonight, look up at the stars. See them not as distant lights, but as homes, as destinations, as the vast network of consciousness that we've been invited to join. And remember that somewhere among those stars, other beings are looking back at us, waiting to see what we'll choose to become. The seeds of a lost civilization have taken root in human soil. They're growing now, reaching toward a light we can barely imagine. What blooms from those seeds depends on us.